He was a quiet 82-year-old veteran who just wanted to be left alone until a knock at the door turned his peaceful life into a war zone. Fined, threatened, humiliated by his own homeowners association. But what they didn't know, what no one knew, was that the stream they tried to claim he already owned it. And what followed was a battle so personal, so explosive, it would shape the entire community to its core. This isn't just a story about land. It's a story about legacy, defiance, and a man who reminded the world that real power doesn't wear a suit, it walks with a cane. They called it nothing more than a ditch, but to Harold Whitmore, it was a sacred place, more than a creek, more than a sliver of nature trickling through his backyard. This stretch of water had been there since long before Harold was born, weaving gently through the southern Appalachian hills like a silver ribbon stitched into the earth. After serving 2 brutal tours in Vietnam and losing half his hearing, Harold returned to his hometown, broken in ways only silence could soothe. And the creek? It spoke a language only men like him understood. It gurgled and hummed through seasons, never rushing, never stopping, like time itself, slow and steady. After his wife passed from cancer a few years ago, Harold found deeper meaning in that stream. Every evening, he'd sit on the old cedar bench they built together, toss feed to the bluegill, talk to her like she was still beside him, and let the soft croaks of frogs or dragonfly wings fill the silence. His grandson, Eli, had learned how to bait a hook on those muddy banks. They'd spent hours catching nothing, laughing at everything. That patch of land wasn't just property. It was memory, healing, connection. And Harold, in his aging bones, knew one thing to be true. Some things ain't meant to be owned, measured, or managed. They're just meant to be honored. But when the bulldozers came and the people with perfect smiles and fake concern showed up with clipboards and bylaws, Harold had no idea his sanctuary was about to become a battleground. IT started with the trees. First came the chainsaws, buzzing through the morning fog like angry hornets, tearing down the towering oaks and maples that had shaded the edge of Harold's property line for decades. Then came the survey flags, bright pink and orange dots stabbing into the earth like tiny warnings. Harold watched from his kitchen window, coffee cooling in his hand, as strangers in tight polo shirts and shiny boots strutted around the land like it already belonged to them. A luxury housing development. They said, custom homes with pools and tennis courts and a view. They called it Silver Springs Estates, though there weren't any springs left by the time they were done. The people who moved in came with manicured dogs, leased SUVs, and loud complaints. They didn't wave when Harold drove by. They didn't nod when he mowed near the property edge. And when the first backyard barbecue turned into a drunken HOA recruitment event, Harold knew this wasn't a neighborhood. It was a takeover. These weren't families looking for community. They were investors seeking equity and social climbers obsessed with order. What Harold saw as a natural heartbeat of land, they saw as a flaw in their backyard oasis. The creek, once admired by wandering children and Sunday painters, was now a nuisance, a muddy, mosquito-ridden ditch ruining their landscape, lighting plans. And at the helm of it all was a woman named Deborah Holloway, who would soon make it her personal mission to conquer the one part of the land she didn't yet control. Deborah Holloway was the type of woman who mistook control for character, order for virtue, and silence for surrender. Formerly a regional banking executive with 2 ex-husbands and a closet full of power suits, she didn't retire to this town to relax. She came to dominate. Within months of moving into her 5-bedroom faux colonial home overlooking the treetops, she seized control of the HOA board through charm, manipulation, and an uncanny ability to weaponize small talk. Her eyes scanned property lines like a military strategist, and when she saw Harold's unpaved driveway, garden of wildflowers, and, most of all, that unruly creek, she decided it had to go. Deborah called it an ecological eyesore, a legal liability, and a non-compliant water feature, depending on who she was talking to. At meetings, she painted Harold as a hazard to community aesthetics, claiming his backyard was a breeding ground for insects and damp rot. What she didn't say, what she couldn't say, was that Harold represented something she couldn't tolerate. Independence. No monthly dues. No manicured shrubs. No mailbox painted to match the trim. Just a quiet man with history in his eyes and soil under his nails. And that creek? It ran free. untouched, unbothered, unbent to modern design. Deborah saw that natural stream the same way she saw Harold. Wild, outdated, and in the way. So she began her campaign. Not with bulldozers, not yet, but with letters, rumors, and the slow drip of bureaucratic poison meant to push Harold off the land that gave his life meaning. It started as a nuisance. A yellow envelope in Harold's mailbox marked "Official Notice from the Silver Springs HOA Compliance Committee." Inside, a coldly typed letter accused him of unauthorized water retention infrastructure. Harold chuckled at first. Infrastructure? It was a creek. Nature. He ignored it. But a week later, another envelope came, this time warning of continued noncompliance and referencing possible fines. Then came the so-called site visits. A pair of HOA-appointed inspectors in khakis and sunglasses began prowling the edge of Harold's fence line, snapping photos, scribbling notes on clipboards like they were auditing Fort Knox. Harold approached one to ask questions, but the man just grunted, "We're assessing drainage safety." The woman wouldn't even make eye contact. That night, Harold found a bright orange flag stuck in the ground near the stream's bend, marked with coated spray paint. It felt less like a notice and more like a threat. Soon after, anonymous complaints started flooding in, noise reports when Harold wasn't even home, claims of unsecured animals because a pair of ducks nested near the water, and a citation for landscaping debris when his grandson left a tackle box on the bank. It wasn't just petty. It was war. Legal, slow, silent war. Harold knew what pressure tactics looked like. He'd seen them used on scared villagers and defiant soldiers alike. This wasn't about drainage. It was about dominance. And the goal was clear. Make life hard enough that Harold would sell, give up, or disappear. At first, Harold thought the silence was coincidence. The neighbor who used to wave during morning jogs now stared straight ahead. The mailman, once talkative about fishing spots, suddenly avoided eye contact. Mothers walking strollers pulled their kids closer when passing his yard. And then came the flyers. Printed on glossy paper and slipped into mailboxes, they featured a stock photo of standing water and a bold headline. "Is your property at risk?" Below, Deborah's neatly typed message warned residents of untended water channels and contaminant-bearing wildlife originating from nearby unmanaged terrain. No names were mentioned, but everyone knew. They always knew. The next community meeting Harold attended felt like a courtroom. Eyes on him. Lips tight. People he'd helped fix fences for years ago now watched him like a threat. A mother stood and asked why her child had got mosquito bites after playing nearby. A man demanded to know what Harold was doing to control runoff. Deborah, poised and smiling, said nothing directly. But every pause, every glance, every loaded question told a tale. The implication was clear. Harold, with his ancient trees and muddy boots and antique sense of right and wrong, was dragging the whole place down. That creek of his, it was a relic they no longer wanted. And the worst part wasn't their judgment. It was the realization that truth no longer mattered. The people around him had traded curiosity for fear, nature for concrete, and community for compliance. Harold didn't just feel unwelcome, he felt erased. The morning it all came to a head, Harold woke to the sound of boots crunching gravel outside his back gate. Not squirrels, not birds, boots. Multiple pairs. By the time he stepped out onto his porch in his robe, coffee trembling in his hand, 3 county code enforcement officers were already taping off a section of the stream bed. This area has been deemed non-compliant under environmental risk provisions. One of them recited like a machine, holding up a laminated map Harold had never seen. You are required to cease all access to the stream until further notice. When Harold asked why, they handed him another citation, this one from a county department he'd never dealt with. He tried to explain that the creek had been there before zoning, before subdivisions, before any of this existed, but they didn't care. Bureaucracy didn't care about history. One officer, with pity in his eyes, muttered, "You should talk to someone, maybe a lawyer." Then, without another word, they stapled the warning sign right onto the fence post where Eli carved his initials last summer. That night, Harold sat alone on the porch, watching the creek shimmer under the moonlight. And for the first time in decades, he didn't hear peace in its burble. He heard threat. Later, Eli stopped by after football practice, still in uniform, and when he saw the sign, he asked, "Grandpa, are they going to take it away?" That question shattered Harold's heart, not because of what it meant for the land, but what it meant for the boy's belief in fairness, in right and wrong. "Not if I can help it," Harold replied, gripping his old coffee mug like it was a rifle stock. Because now this wasn't just about land. It was about memory, legacy, dignity, the kind of things you don't give up, not without a fight. What the HOA didn't know, what not even Harold fully remembered, was a line buried deep in an old folder inside his late wife's cedar chest. On a sleepless night, Harold decided to dig through it, seeking comfort in her handwriting and pressed flowers. But instead, he found gold, a copy of a property deed, yellow with age, stamped and notarized in 1972. The language was dry, legal, but one line leapt out like thunder. Includes all natural and artificial waterways originating or terminating within boundaries of Parcel 38C, inclusive of tributary rights. Harold blinked. Read it again. Then again. He took it to a local attorney, a quiet man named Rodriguez who ran a small one-room office above the hardware store. Rodriguez read the document twice, then slowly removed his glasses and said, "Mr. Whitmore, unless I'm missing something, that creek, it's yours. Not the HOA's, not the county's. Yours. Completely." Harold didn't know whether to laugh or cry. For years, he assumed the creek was shared land, some forgotten remnant of old zoning. But now, he had proof, irrefutable legal proof, that the water everyone was trying to control already belonged to him. Rodriguez grinned. They messed with the wrong vet. And with that, Harold didn't just have hope. He had leverage. The HOA had built their campaign on assumptions and appearances. But now Harold held the truth, and truth, when backed by paper and grit, can tear down entire empires of deceit. For the first time in months, Harold walked back to the creek and smiled, not at the water, but at the storm he was about to unleash. Armed with a deed and newfound resolve, Harold instructed Rodriguez to draft a cease and desist letter, not just to the HOA, but to every board member involved in the campaign against him. It was polite, professional, and devastating. It cited not only ownership, but decades of uninterrupted access, environmental preservation efforts, and a full record of HOA harassment. But Harold didn't stop there. He sent a certified letter to the local paper, an op-ed titled, "The Price of Peace, When Community Becomes Control." In it, he recounted his story with painful honesty, a war veteran chased from his land not by invaders, but by neighbors who valued order over compassion. He wrote of his wife, of Eli, of the healing power of that creek, and how the HOA tried to rob him of all three. The letter went viral, at least in small-town terms. Comments flooded in. Old neighbors he hadn't spoken to in years showed up with casseroles and firm handshakes. Local veterans rallied behind him. Even the county clerk's office, once cold and indifferent, called to apologize for procedural oversight. And the HOA, Deborah Holloway and her board, they panicked. First came the damage control emails, then the emergency meetings. But the momentum had shifted. This wasn't just about Harold's land anymore. It was about a deeper sickness in modern community life. The HOA had poked a man who had faced jungles, fire, and death. They thought he was just an old man with a fishing pole. They forgot he was a soldier. And now, with truth on his side and a town behind him, Harold wasn't backing down. He was standing taller than he had in years. And for the first time, people truly saw him. The final HOA meeting was standing room only. Dozens crowded the community center, many wearing hats from their service days or holding hand-painted signs like "Let Nature Live" and "Respect Your Neighbors." News cameras showed up. A local radio host broadcasted live. And at the center of it all, Harold sat calmly in a flannel shirt, the original deed folded neatly in his jacket pocket. Deborah tried to maintain control, but her voice cracked. She opened with a speech about shared standards and communal values. But the room wasn't buying it. When she claimed the HOA was only acting in the best interest of the community, a man in the back shouted, "What about Harold's interests?" Applause followed. Then Rodriguez stood up. "As legal counsel for Mr. Whitmore," he began, voice smooth and firm, "I can confirm he holds legal ownership of the stream, its banks, and its tributary access, protected under county and state law. Dead silence. Any further attempts to restrict access, fine him, or defame him will be met with immediate legal action. Deborah's face turned the color of overripe strawberries. The meeting dissolved into a mix of outrage and celebration. Some homeowners apologized publicly. Others demanded Deborah's resignation. But Harold said nothing. He didn't gloat, didn't sneer. He simply stood, nodded at the crowd, and walked out with dignity. Because this wasn't about revenge. It was about justice, and earning back the respect that people like Deborah had tried to strip away. He wasn't just defending a stream. He was reclaiming something bigger. His story, weeks passed, then months. The signs came down. The letters stopped. The flags vanished. The creek, unbothered by human drama, continued its ancient whisper through the trees. Eli and Harold fished there again, just like before. The tackle box returned. So did the laughter. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low and dragonflies danced over the water, Harold sat on the cedar bench and closed his eyes. He heard his wife's voice in the breeze, felt her presence in the rustling leaves. Around him, the world had changed. But here, by the sacred stream, time stood still. The neighbors no longer passed in silence. They waved. Some even stopped to chat. Deborah? She moved away, quietly, without ceremony, replaced by a younger couple who planted wildflowers near the stream's edge, saying they wanted to keep the spirit of the place alive. And Harold, though older, walked a little straighter. His fight wasn't about ego. It wasn't about rules. It was about soul, about not letting people bully you out of what matters, about knowing when to be still and when to stand. He didn't need parades or plaques. He just needed this water, this bench, this life. The lesson was simple. Don't let go of what grounds you, no matter how loud the world gets, no matter how many rules they wave in your face. Some things are worth standing your ground for. And when you do, when you hold your truth with quiet strength, you don't just protect your land, you protect the future. With the legal dust settled and the HOA silenced, something surprising began to happen. Not overnight, but slowly, like frost melting from winter soil. The community started to wake up. Neighbors who had once whispered behind curtains now showed up with folding chairs and asked if Harold needed help trimming trees or clearing brush near the stream. One man, a former board member who had signed off on the citation letters, came to Harold with tears in his eyes and said, "I was wrong. I was trying to follow rules, not people." Harold didn't hug him. He didn't need to. He simply nodded and said, "Takes a man to say that." The lesson wasn't lost on anyone. Word of Harold's battle spread beyond the neighborhood. Veterans groups, local town halls, even state HOA regulators cited his case in discussions on homeowner rights and overreach. It became more than a personal victory. It became a blueprint for how a man with a backbone and a box of old papers could hold a line against a faceless machine. More importantly, the children in the community began to treat Harold not like a relic, but like a hero. They'd wave from their bikes or sit by him to hear stories about the war, about fishing with Eli, about what it meant to stand for something when you could have just sat down. The very stream they tried to fence off became a place of learning, of stories, of unity. What started as a battle became a revival. And Harold, who once felt like he was being erased, now felt more present, more needed than he had in decades. It turned out that the thing he protected, this quiet creek, wasn't just water. It was memory. It was community. And in saving it, he had helped everyone find something they didn't know they were missing. Eli had been quiet through most of the chaos. Not because he didn't care, but because he watched everything, absorbed it, learned. So one rainy Saturday, he showed up at Harold's door holding a rough wooden box and said, "I made this in shop class." Inside was a handmade frame, crafted from driftwood pulled from the creek. Inside the frame was a photo Eli had taken with his phone. Harold standing by the stream, cane in hand, sunlight pouring over his shoulders like a medal. Below the photo, burned into a plaque, were 6 simple words. "You taught me how to fight." Harold's breath caught. He sat down slowly, staring at it as though it were a medal of honor. "I didn't think you were watching," he whispered. Eli just smiled. "I was watching everything." That moment sealed something deeper than ownership. deeper than pride. It was legacy. The knowledge that what Harold stood for, honor, resilience, love for land and family, would carry on long after he was gone. The creek would still flow, and Eli would still remember what it took to keep it wild and free. Because in the end, every battle you fight with courage becomes a story your grandchildren will pass down. And when Harold looked at that framed photo on his mantle, he didn't just see a reflection. He saw proof that he hadn't just won a fight, he'd won the future. Just when Harold thought the story was over, a manila envelope arrived in the mail from the State Department of Conservation and Heritage Lands. Inside was a formal letter, typed and signed, commending Harold for his efforts in preserving ecologically and historically significant land. But the real surprise was what came next. The state offered to register the stream and its surrounding acreage as a protected private landmark under the Veterans Stewardship Preservation Act. It meant the land would be forever shielded from development, HOA policy, or rezoning, but still under Harold's name. The honor came with a small grant to help restore parts of bank, build a bench, even plant native flowers. It was the state's way of saying, "We see you, we're with you." Harold stared at the document, hands trembling, not from age but emotion. For years, he felt ignored by the very systems he fought to defend. And now, finally, they acknowledged not just his sacrifice, but his heart. He took Eli down to the water that evening and told him the news. "This land will outlive us," he said, placing a hand on the boy's shoulder. "But it'll always be ours." And now, no one could ever take it. Together, they planted a small sign at the trail entrance, one that read, "Veterans Creek, protected by honor," and as the wind rustled the tall grass around them, Harold felt something he hadn't in years, relief. Not because the fight was over, but because it had been worth every second. In a twist no one expected, Deborah Holloway tried to stage a comeback. She posted a rambling blog defending her actions, accusing Harold of manipulating public sympathy. But it backfired. The comments were brutal. Former allies turned their backs. The board held a private vote and stripped her of her position. She eventually moved to a gated community 2 counties away, one without a creek. Harold heard about it from a neighbor who thought he'd be pleased, but all he said was, "I hope she finds peace." That surprised people, but not Eli. "Grandpa," he asked one day, "why aren't you mad anymore?" Harold looked out at the water and replied, "Because holding on to anger is like drinking poison and waiting for the other person to die." That's when Eli understood. Winning didn't mean gloating. Justice didn't mean vengeance. Sometimes, being a man means knowing when to let go. Forgiveness wasn't weakness. It was freedom. And while Deborah vanished into her own bitterness, Harold rose even higher in the town's eyes. Not because he crushed his enemy, but because he showed the strength to walk away. The neighborhood, once ruled by fear and order, now felt more human, more neighborly. Rules were still followed, but with compassion, with understanding. And it all started because one man refused to be bullied. Even when he stood alone, years passed. Seasons changed. Trees grew taller, roots deeper. The creek never stopped flowing. It witnessed weddings, funeral, first steps, and last breaths. And through it all, Harold remained its quiet guardian. On his 85th birthday, the town hosted a surprise celebration by the water. Veterans spoke. Kids sang. Eli, now a young man heading to college, gave a speech that made grown men cry. He spoke not of war or victory, but of character, of watching a man stand firm when others bent, of learning that the land we protect ends up protecting us. That night, as stars filled the sky and lanterns floated over the creek, Harold sat in his old wooden chair, wrapped in a blanket, and closed his eyes. The laughter echoed around him. The water gurgled its eternal hymn. And for the first time, he allowed himself to rest, truly rest, knowing that what he built would last. Not just the land, not just a legacy, but the example, the kind that ripples through generations like water through stone. Because in the end, Harold didn't just win a fight. He taught a town how to stand tall, love fiercely, and protect what truly matters. And that is the kind of story that never ends. It just keeps flowing like a creek through the heart of time.